Good afternoon, folks. I'm Brian Withrow, portraying Ulysses S. Grant. I'm not going to attempt to do this conversation in the first person as Grant, and the reason being is Grant himself was a very quiet, unassuming, humble man. He could be very talkative amongst friends, his family, intimate settings, but amongst the public and everything, he was a very reserved man. So coming in and giving a talk, like this would be very much out of character. And what I'm going to talk to you would be hundreds of more words than you would have ever gotten out of his mouth, probably 1,000 more out of his mouth. So to do the man justice in terms of, there are times in which I will portray him first person. We have staff officers that would meet you. If you had been somebody who had come to General Grant's staff on business, you'd have been met by an aide-de-camp who would have brought you over. Grant would have probably done more just listening and heard what you had to say, what you're telling. He'd tell you what he needed to send you off on your business, and that'd be it. So to do this and to tell you what I'm going to tell you about, it really doesn't lend itself to me doing it as General Grant. But everything I will tell you will be from his plans, his perspective. And what the program I originally did at 12:30 was to talk a little bit about his part of his overall grand strategy, and particularly his strategy in Virginia. When Grant is brought west after the successes in the Western theater, and they get the attention of Lincoln and folks, and Lincoln says, this man fights, and he is the one that clearly has the idea of what it's going to take to win this war. That the only way we're going to win this war is by destroying their armies or getting them to capitulate, to lay down their arms. It's not about taking places, it's about getting them to lay down their arms and go home. And if that takes destroying their armies to do it, Grant wins a series of victories out west. So he's brought east in March of 1864, made general-in-chief, and promoted to the rank of lieutenant general. He becomes, they resurrect the rank, and I say resurrect because he becomes the highest rank in the active army is a major general, 2 stars. The only 3-star lieutenant general that we had in the field was General George Washington. So they resurrect the rank of lieutenant general and make Grant the first lieutenant general, because Lincoln wants all those other officers out there to know, this is my chosen man and he's the one in command. He ranks you all. So Grant is brought east and given the command of all armies in the field. After he goes through the pomp and ceremony in Washington, which he's very uncomfortable with, and again, I said he's not a public persona. That's an uncomfortable set. But he goes through all of that, he's right down to business. He goes back to Tennessee and meets with his friend at Nashville with General Sherman, and he's basically coming up with a grand strategy plan on how to end this war. Not just in Virginia, but in the whole country. How do we subdue this rebellion and how do we get this war over? So his grand strategy is, one of the factors of it is that in May, once he decides the date in which it's going to start, in May of 1864, it's that there's 2 major Confederate armies left. Lee's army in Northern Virginia, and then Johnston's army down near Atlanta. He tells his friend General Sherman, wherever General Johnston goes, you were going to go. You were going to take on that army. He tells General Meade, once he makes the decision to retain General Meade in command of the Army of Potomac, wherever General Lee goes, you will go as well. While we may maneuver to draw them out of their works, and Grant knows he has an affinity for Richmond, we're going to maneuver and we're going to try to draw him out of his works. But the target is not Richmond. The target is the Army of Northern Virginia. We need to destroy them or get them to capitulate. That's the difference in the strategy. So I'm not going to talk about the overall strategy of what happens through a war. We're now going to focus on what happens here in Virginia. So here in Virginia, the Federal Army is encamped north here around Brandy Station, north of Culpeper. Grant actually establishes his first headquarters in the field at Culpeper. Goes back and forth between Washington and out to coordinate this, but comes up with that grand strategy plan. But in Virginia, the very first decision he has to make is Lee's army is encamped all around Orange and entrenchments around there. Well, again, we don't want to take on their army in their entrenchments. We want to draw his army out, and so where our superior manpower, artillery, and condition of the army will come to bear. So he can either swing to the west, utilizing the roads and the railroad on this side, and also the advantage out there is that it's flat, it's open country. So to move to the west and to draw Lee out away from Orange to the west, there are some advantages of that. However, Grant says he might have chosen that if he had had 6 months more time to evaluate. He knew the Army of the Potomac itself was good, well-trained, well-conditioned, but he didn't know the nature of all of the corps commanders there. He said if he'd had about 6 months more time, he felt a little more comfortable about going the western route. The other thing politically that was a sensitive subject for the folks in Washington is that by moving this way, you then leave the route to Washington open, and so they were real sensitive about uncovering Washington. So Grant looks, okay, well, how can about going like the Army had done before under General Hooker and stuff, and going to the east, but bypassing the dense area known as the wilderness. There are advantages in that you also have the roads and the railroad that comes through here, but then you also have the advantage of the major waterways. And also for the advantage of not only for being able to supply the Army as it moves south, but then also the advantage of being able to medically, casualties and everything, cannot have to go all the way up on rail and roads. They can evacuate them to the major landings on the waterways and get them to the major field hospitals or hospitals that are established in Washington City. They can evacuate them to the field hospitals, treat them there, and once they're stable enough, get them on the boats and everything, and get them to the big hospitals in Washington to be cared for. So that was also another consideration. But so ultimately that's the decision he made, because also politically that gives him the ability to move this way. He keeps his army between Lee's army and Washington. So he makes that decision. He does not want to fight here. He tells General Meade that they were going to rapidly cross the Rapidan in the beginning of May, and they want to get through this wilderness area and get out to the more open country. However, when Lee is trying to figure out, okay, what is Grant going to do, he looks at it, and some historians say Lee has the advantage of knowing the Virginia chessboard a little bit better than Grant, and he also has the advantage of what they call military interior lines. Lee looks at it and he goes, I bet he's going to cross, and he basically anticipates Grant's maneuver. So when the Army moves across the Rapidan and starts to maneuver, Lee, which becomes his last major offensive of the war, moves out of the entrenchments and hits the Federal Army while they are, because the Federal Army, while they're a little bit obviously larger, about 110,000 versus his forces of 60,000, more men artillery, but they also have about 4,000 wagon supply trains. It's a little bit cumbersome. And bottom line is, by Lee more rapidly moving at his works and hitting them there, he's able to hit them in the wilderness. And the Battle of the Wilderness ends up being a multi-day back and forth swing battle. There were opportunities on both sides to which either side could have broke their forces, but it ends up basically being a tactical stalemate with significant losses on both sides. So after the stalemate in the wilderness, Grant said, okay, I'm going to maneuver again and then try to get Lee out from his works and try to get him out into the open country past Spotsylvania. Lee countermaneuvers, actually anticipates Grant's movements again, and they dig in here. So again, a multiple day, Grant still tries different options and tactics and tries to go against the works at Spotsylvania, has some minor successes, some breakthroughs, but ultimately the defensive works are too powerful. So again, swings out again. Lee again beats him to North Anna, Hanover Junction area, where all this, Grant comes this way because of the confluence of the railroads and the roadways, but again Lee maneuvers his army and digs in. From the time of the Wilderness to each engagement afterwards, Lee not only beats him to the spot, but they immediately entrench. They immediately dig in. So Grant never gets the opportunity to catch them out in the open. He is always having to try to attack them in well-entrenched, dug-in positions. And militarily, it takes at least a 3-to-1 advantage. Known that you're going to take heavier losses when you're the one-off force on the attack, trying to get them out of their works. When he gets down in North Anna, there's some probing, some skirmishes and everything, but Grant goes, after what we did at Spotsylvania, they're too powerful. Maneuvers again, and ends up a short engagement around Totopotomoy Creek, and then swings over here to Cold Harbor area. The difference in Cold Harbor is that this becomes the very first opportunity in which he has General Sheridan sent over. General Sheridan's over there. He sends General Sheridan and actually secures the crossroads here at Cold Harbor. And then the Army of the Potomac actually gets to this spot before Lee's army does. However, again, unwielding, kind of cumbersome, and a little infighting between the corps commanders of the Army of the Potomac. They get here, but then they spend all this time trying to get their forces lined up, positioned, and General Meade comes to General Grant and says, I need an additional 24 hours. This is on the 2nd of June. And Grant reluctantly agrees. He's in command of the Army of the Potomac. That's what he's asking for. I got to put my trust in him. So that's how the attack gets delayed 24 hours. After the Confederate Army's experience, Wilderness, Spotsylvania, North Anna, the engineers could come out and say, okay, here's how we want you to lay out the lines. But the soldiers themselves had become so experienced at building these formidable works and knew how to do it, was that other than Lee, and his folks saying, okay, you're going to be here, you're going to be here, your corps and everything. After that, they took over and they created these works. That additional 24 hours proved significantly costly, because that gave them the additional 24 hours to what used to take days to build these formidable positions, they were able to do in 24 hours.
Thank you for watching our video. Please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave those in the comment section. We'll work on getting them out to you as soon as possible.